Hi there, my name is Neil Blevins, and this is a tutorial about compositional weight. So before I start, I just wanted to mention that I'm sorry if my voice might sound a little bit off or groggy or something like that. As many of you probably know, the entire west coast of the United States is on fire right now. So lots of smoke in the air, so I apologize ahead of time if my voice isn't perfect, but I wanted to get this done anyway, so here we go. So this lesson, as I mentioned, is compositional weight, and different objects, due to contrast, color, shape, and size, have a stronger or weaker presence compared to other objects in a particular scene. So this presence is sometimes referred to as weight. So a stronger presence has a stronger weight, as though the objects in your painting have an actual mass to them. And to have a successful composition, you need to balance the weight of these shapes, not only with each other, but also with the frame that you place the composition into. So we're going to start with some theory on how to achieve balance in your compositions, and then go into some practical examples where I show some successes and a few failures in my own artwork about achieving balance in the composition. So let's start by defining weight. So as I mentioned before, something that has a strong presence in your image has weight. And something that has weight also becomes a focal point being something that the eye will immediately gravitate to. And so one way to achieve a focal point, or more weight, is to achieve this through contrast. So if you haven't already, I wrote a tutorial a number of years ago about contrasts in compositions, and there's a link to it in the YouTube channel. So if you need more information about how to use contrast and the different types of contrast in a composition, please take a peek at that. And then also, as well as referring to certain objects in a painting having a weight, you can also refer to the overall weight of the entire image. For example, here's 4 examples. So this image is very right-heavy because there's more stuff going on the right and less on the left. This one is more left-heavy. This one is more bottom-heavy. And then this one is more top-heavy. So here's a really simple example of weight. The right side of this image has the most weight because it has the bigger object. Now the size of the object on the right is making the whole image unbalanced. It almost feels as like if you took this image and put it on your wall, the whole thing would tip off because this part is just way heavier, and it would, like slump to this side and then fall right off of your wall. But size isn't the only way to achieve compositional weight. So here's an example where color creates weight. So both squares here and here are the same size, but the image feels heavy on the right because there's a stronger color contrast. So this color really draws your eye compared to the difference between these two colors, and so the right side here has more weight. So to achieve balance in your composition, there should be no difference of weight in any portion of the painting. Otherwise, you'll feel like the painting is leading in a particular direction. So one simple way to do this is through symmetry, and that is everything on the right side should also exist on the left, and the same could be said about top and bottom. So this image you see here, this has equal weight on both the left and the right, and that's because it's symmetrical. But if your composition is asymmetrical, it is still totally possible to have a balanced weight in the image. It just takes a little bit more work. So let's discuss the fulcrum principle, also known as the teeter-totter. So the principle states that if something is heavy due to its size, color, or contrast, it should be closer to the center of the image. And if something is light, it should be further away. And when I say light, I mean in heaviness, not light as in the value of the particular part. So imagine a seesaw from when you were a kid. Assuming you know what a seesaw is. It's kind of funny. These days there don't seem to be a lot of seesaws, at least in North America anymore, because they're viewed as dangerous. So I assume, though, everyone has some idea of what a seesaw is, even if you haven't been on one. But when I was a kid, and let's say that you only had an adult to play with instead of another kid, and if you both sat on the different sides of the seesaw here, what would happen is that the adult would hit the ground, the kid would be up in the air, and then it would be no fun because there was no way for you to go back down because your weight just wasn't strong enough, so you'd be stuck up in the air. So a number of ways of fixing this. First was to add a second kid to one side, and that could help create balance because the weight here would be equal to the weight that's over on the other side. Or another technique is to keep one kid, but move the adult closer to the center. And this also allowed you to then go up and down, and it allows you to achieve balance. So just like with physical weight, the same is true with elements in your composition. So let's take that original image that we saw previously that was way too heavy on the right, and let's balance it out. So using the first technique, one way of balancing it out is by adding more small objects on the other side to counter the one large object. Or you can move the heavier object closer to the center and the lighter object further away from the center. And that makes the thing feel far more balanced. And you can even mix different techniques, like you can balance a bigger object with an object that has a stronger color contrast on the other side. So 2 quick notes before we move on to some practical examples. Anyone who watches somebody paint something in Photoshop will notice them using the transform, flip vertical, or flip horizontal command a lot. And the reason they do this is to avoid having the composition be unbalanced. So, for example, right here. So if you stare at an image long enough, we become sort of blind to an unbalanced composition. And by flipping it, it tricks the brain into reconsidering the image, kind of seeing it fresh. And then we can see the flaws in the composition's balance. So for example, going back to the original image, I tend to weigh my compositions too heavily on the right, probably because I'm right-handed. So when I flip the canvas horizontally, all of a sudden, all that compositional weight will be on the left, and my brain will sort of say, like, hey, you need to put more stuff on the right in order to balance the stuff on the left. So I would add more stuff on the right, and then I would flip the canvas horizontally back again, so I had my original image, but now the result is going to be a far more balanced canvas. And the second note is on landscapes. Because we see landscapes in real life all the time, we're very used to seeing a really detailed ground with a less detailed sky. So while achieving balance is always still a good idea, like for example adding some clouds to the sky if this were a painting, so you're balancing the details in the ground, not achieving perfect balance in a landscape is one of those kind of lesser mistakes because its balance problem is something that the audience is used to seeing, and so it won't bother them as much. So people will likely forgive you for a composition like this, even though the ideal is something more like this, where you have some clouds in there. So here's some examples from my old artwork, and we'll start off with a failure. So here's a composition I made 15 years ago, which I don't think does a very good job from a weight perspective. And the main issue is dealing with light and dark. So you see here, up here, there's a lot of light up in this corner, but there's nothing to balance it off contrast-wise here in the lower left. And so the whole painting feels kind of unbalanced. So if I wanted to achieve better balance, adding something more contrasty down in this area would certainly help. So you can see the difference between here and here. And then using the fulcrum principle, I could move the bright patch that is up here and bring it closer to the center by adding a little bit of a vignette up here. And so this image here is far more balanced than the original image here. So here's an example with a more recent painting, a quick speed painting I did. So a mistake I see frequently in a lot of student portfolios is adding too much weight to a particular part of a composition due to the way the image is cropped, as in where the edge of the image is. So for example, take this painting, and I've done an alternate crop from the one I ended up on, and notice how much weight there exists at the top of the image with the big mothership, but there's very little at the bottom of the composition to balance it off, since this is mostly kind of low contrast clouds down here. So 2 ways to fix this. One is you can add something in the cloud area to give more weight at the bottom, like I could add a more detailed spaceship down here. Or what I did in my original painting was to have far more space up at the top here of the mothership. So the mothership was a little closer to the center of the composition, and that gave it a lot better balance. Remember, changing the crop, in this case adding more sky, of an image can do the same thing as moving an element closer to the center of our teeter-totter. So by adding some more canvas to the top of the image, or wherever the image needs more canvas added, we're moving the heavier element, in this case the mothership, closer to the center of the image to balance off the rest of the composition. So also note the mothership in the composition is still a little higher than the center, which still gives a little bit of extra weight on the top. And so that's why, for example, I put this little spaceship down here. It seems like a pretty small detail, but I tried to use it in order to balance out the area of contrast in the bottom half of the composition. So you can see it right there. And one other note, you'll notice that I also worked on trying to achieve left-right balance. And so when I placed these fins up at the top here, I then needed to balance that off. So I added another fin, which is down here, so that this area wouldn't be too heavy. And that's also, notice where I placed the little spaceship again is over on this side. So this stuff here is trying to balance off this stuff there. So two more examples. This is an image from my ink book, and this is the space pirates have landed in their spaceship and are meeting Ink and Landis for the first time. So I used symmetry to place the people on the left and the spaceship on the right to balance off the composition. But unfortunately, while the objects are placed in a balanced manner in terms of position, we have atmosphere that we have to consider. So the ship is further than the people from our camera, and so the people are going to be darker because they're closer, and the ship is going to be lighter. And that kind of ruins the balance. So I did two things to try to fix this. The first thing I did is I made the ship larger and bulkier than the people so that the size might draw the eye more over to this area, even though it's lighter. And then I also varied the mist on the ship to be more on the left side and less on the right side. So the darkest part of the ship is on the extreme right, and just like our teeter-totter, it's there to sort of balance off the heavier people that's on the left. So one more example from the Story of Ink book. The main ship here, and I refer to this as the main ship because it's the darkest and it's the closest to the camera. It's almost dead center in the canvas. So now where do we place the other ships? So the second ship that I placed, and it's still reasonably dark because it's still pretty close to the camera, is this one on the right. But then that weighs the whole composition too much onto the right. So to compensate, I place the next two ships to the left of the main ship, which you can see here. So these ships are further from the camera, and they're smaller and not as bright, but there's two of them. So what I'm trying to do is, again, the fulcrum principle. I'm taking this one darker one here, darker and larger one, and I'm trying to balance it with two smaller and lighter ones that are over here. And then the remaining ships I placed kind of in the same manner. Now, looking at this now, I still feel like this might be not perfectly balanced. Still might be a little bit right heavy. So if I went back, I might do something like, for example, crop this part of the image off so that that would move everything a little bit closer to the center to achieve perfect balance. So achieving balance in a composition can be a very difficult task, and even people with a lot of experience don't always get it perfect all the time. And of course, even the term perfect is kind of a subjective thing. What is perfect? So don't worry about achieving perfect balance in a composition, but use these techniques to avoid making really unbalanced compositions. Unless, of course, you want it to be unbalanced for a specific reason. For example, let's say you wanted a spaceship to feel really heavy. You could place it really far to the right and have nothing to balance it on the left. And while the composition would be unbalanced and maybe a little bit difficult to look at, the viewer will certainly feel the heft of the spaceship in a really physical way. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting and useful. Please visit my website, neilblevins.com, and go to the art lessons section if you'd like to see more tutorials, both written and video. And also you can subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to be notified the next time I add more videos. So thank you very much for watching.